Chapter 3: Faddas against Gracie. Long before the foundation of the Fadda Academy of Bento Ribeiro, and also before Mestre Fadda himself started Jiu-Jitsu, it was already widely developed by the brothers Carlos and Helinho Gracie with their academy in the central and noble area of the city. Luis de Franca had already introduced Fadda to Gracie as a Jiu-Jitsu reference he could have outside of the military environment. Fadda already cultivated a deep admiration for the Gracie family, in particular for champion Grandmaster Helinho Gracie, who carried the Jiu-Jitsu flag in challenges against other fighting systems. Helinho Gracie and his brothers defeated everyone who faced their unbeatable Jiu-Jitsu taught to Carlos by Maeda, among other teachers. Gracie Academy insisted on making clear the difference between Judo, which, introduced as a sport, was widespread. Judo, brought by the Japanese, preceded the Jiu-Jitsu that Carlos had trained and learned, since it was precisely for its diffusion in Brazil, by the seal of the Jiu-Jitsu master Jigoro Kano, that the Japanese presented themselves, in order to teach the so-called Kano Jiu-Jitsu system, name that precedes and would be recognized in the future as Judo. Fadda mirrored the way the Gracies promoted Jiu-Jitsu, with challenges and victories against other martial arts. But he realized that the path to follow was another, since his pedagogical methodology and ways of disseminating his work to other fighting styles was a notable choice of words and gestures of cordiality and respect, a reflection of the family teachings left by his father. Father João Batista and the sublime philosophical concepts left by Luis de Franca in the Navy. Fadda, without publicity or investment resources, believed that the main form of dissemination would be the results obtained by his students. The Jiu-Jitsu learned from Luis de Franca had a different execution bias and very similar to its fundamental and oriental philosophical origins, focused on discipline, the spirit of citizenship, the physical and mental health of its practitioners, as well as a result, an effective defense and attack for combats of a military nature. A Jiu-Jitsu very close to the original presented by the Japanese military Sada Miyako and Kakirara in the Navy in 1908. Integrity, courage, compassion, respect, honesty, honor and loyalty. Fadda was motivated to develop the learned method, and since the founding of Bento Ribeiro's Fadda Academy, on January 27, 1950, he began to present his Jiu-Jitsu system to the public. Fadda brought art to other more humble segments of society that did not have access to knowledge and also presented a different vision of art to others. Because many people didn't realize that Jiu-Jitsu was much more than a sparring match, finding Jiu-Jitsu violent and unsuitable for other purposes. In performances and bouts against other martial arts, it was noted that both styles of Jiu-Jitsu, Fadda and Gracie, had origins in the same Japanese-taught Jiu-Jitsu, however they grew up in different motives, times, and conditions. Each with a performance that characterized them differently, but even so, in a general context, basically the same. Fadda always saw great victories featured in the media and communication vehicles, the Gracie family referred to as the one and only representative of Jiu-Jitsu. Helinho Gracie and Carlos Gracie, although they already knew Oswaldo Fadda and his family, ruled out the possibility of the existence of another source of Jiu-Jitsu teaching in Rio de Janeiro other than the Gracie Academy. It was when, in a bold move by Oswaldo Fadda, in 1955, promoting a public note in the Diario da Noite newspaper on Friday, January 14, 1955, Grandmaster Fadda, in a respectful but forceful manner, challenged the Gracie Academy to a Jiu-Jitsu combat among his students. I want my students to face those of Gracie Academy, and I want to make this challenge public through the press. Even when it comes to the traditional and powerful academy that is Gracie's. We respect them as peerless adversaries, but we do not fear them. I have been rationally, methodically and conveniently preparing my students in the same fighting style, and for this very reason, although I have no intention of taking them as losers, as famous, world-renowned fighters, I never did. Although I have my hopes. I run a modest academy, where the students don't have complexes, but if we don't succeed in the fights, this will be one of the contingencies of the sport. I have about 20 students for meetings. It is by competing, facing opponents of this magnitude, that we can evaluate the evolution and improvement of our knowledge. I await a response from Gracie Academy determining the day and time for the matches to take place. As for the location, I'll leave that to the Gracies. Helinho Gracie saw the opportunity to make his students practice and compete in Jiu-Jitsu, instead of his own students fighting each other, something that would cause some strangeness being theoretically the only ones to practice it, since for him the only source of fighting it was at Gracie Academy. Helinho Gracie always liked challenges and was unaware of his opponent's Jiu-Jitsu. He accepted, but a little incredulous in a Jiu-Jitsu that could even come close to what his academy was developing. But even as cordially and respectfully as ever he addressed Fadda, he publicly responded to the challenge.
To be honest, I was impressed by the gentlemanly and sporty way in which we were challenged. It was a challenge in elegant and sporting terms that surprised me a lot, because I have been constantly challenged, and most of the time the terms used reveal spite, unsportsmanship, with the sole objective of hurting myself morally. Despite not underestimating our opponents, I have full confidence in my disciples. As for the final result, I cannot, nor am I allowed, to predict it. Regarding the location of the fights, Fadda really left us that privilege, and therefore, in the absence of another location, I leave the Gracie Academy at your disposal. I proposed the time for the fight to start at 8 p.m. on the 21st of the current month, with the fighters having to be in the gym 1 hour before, that is, at 7 p.m. The regulations for the fights between the Gracie Academy and the Fadda Academy will be the same as those approved by the Brazilian Boxing Confederation for the internal championship.
Verifying the prompt response of the public by Helinho Gracie, Fadda with great joy and enthusiasm had the opportunity to bring up another vision of Jiu-Jitsu that is not Gracie's. Here, on your shoulders, is the responsibility of truly putting Fadda Jiu-Jitsu into practice with opponents who are equal to the martial art. Combined, 20 Fadda students versus 20 Gracie students showed up for the combat sports of Jiu-Jitsu for the first time ever. Under the gaze of the only representatives of Jiu-Jitsu at that time, Oswaldo Fadda and Helinho Gracie recorded the first dispute that marked the birth of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Under the gaze of reporters and the sympathetic public of that day, the main representatives of this oriental martial art developed in Brazil demonstrated among themselves that the knowledge was absorbed and technically adapted to the molds of each lineage by the athletes Gracie and Fadda that day. For reasons beyond our control, of the 20 athletes from each academy combined, only about 14 fights took place according to the results described in the newspaper to which we refer. But this information has other records that contradict it. That doesn't matter though, the fact remains that the challenge was a watershed for Jiu-Jitsu, as Gracie would never have imagined even going into a fight, let alone losing. The result of the 7 Gracie Academy wins was published in the newspaper. Faced with such an unexpected situation, the entire audience, and especially the great champion Helinho Gracie, was surprised by the feats of his opponents. Fadda Academy had won 4 draws, unusual in Gracie history, and the unimaginable feat of 3 wins over the unbeatable Gracie, from the phenomenal and powerful Rio Branco Avenue Academy. He accompanied and directed the technical part of the event, Fadda himself as judge and the great champion Jorge Gracie, brother of Helinho Gracie. Jorge worked as a timekeeper. The press that followed the event recorded the result, according to their vision of the event, formally publishing the article in Jornal Diário da Noite on Monday, January 24, 1955, newspaper note. Victorious Gracie Academy. In 14 fights, Gracie students have won 7, drawn 4 and lost 3. On the night of January 21, 1955, the challenge fights that Oswaldo Fadda threw at the Gracies took place. They arrived at the beautiful Gracie Academy ring to witness the matches that took place between the students of the Gracie and Fadda Academies, a large crowd that literally filled their facilities. At exactly 8 p.m. the night began, taking place the first fight that ended with the victory of the student Gracie. It was a fight won with great class by the local representative that gave the initial impression that the other fights would have the same outcome. However, to the surprise of the majority of the fans, who were in favor of the students from the Avenida Rio Branco Academy, Fadda's students prevailed in the second fight. Keep winning the third, and the fourth. By then there was general surprise, since not even Fadda could see a clear advantage over the kings of Jiu-Jitsu. However, not intimidated by the advantage obtained by the students of the Bento Ribeiro Academy, Helinho Gracie's students began to prevail, undoing the opponent's advantage and completely changing the landscape of the show. They took the reins, finally obtaining a favorable result of 7 victories against 3 losses that faithfully reflects the superiority of the Gracie Academy, whose students were technically superior to the brave and hardworking representatives of the Fadda Academy. It was the judge of the fights, Oswaldo Fadda, head director of the Fadda Jiu-Jitsu Academy, who brilliantly fulfilled his duties, without bowing to the supremacy of the Gracie students. Many noted the presence of George Gracie, who acted as timekeeper. One of the famous brothers who had been away from his family for a long time and who seems to have returned, much to the general joy. With the same affection he always had for the Fadda family off the canvas, Helinho Gracie humbly congratulated Oswaldo Fadda on his display of such unexpected technical skill in Jiu-Jitsu. Master Helinho Gracie pointed to the audience, addressing Fadda. There had to be a Fadda to let everyone know that Jiu-Jitsu is not a Gracie privilege. At the end of the event, the Faddas received the nickname Zapateros, since the lower limb blocking techniques were little known to their opponents. The beginning of the fights, with the admirable ability of the Fadda to project and fight on their feet, already impacted their opponents. The beginning of the fights already guaranteed the psychological advantage to the Fadda under the shock of their opponents, regardless of whether there was victory or defeat on the course. But the differential was the permanent keys to the victories. It was the submissions that stood out the most in the challenge. The culmination of the event was when Jose Guimaraes from the Fadda Academy left Leonidas, one of Gracie's students, completely unconscious after a strangulation carried out in such a smooth and discreet manner that few could perceive the effectiveness and result of the blow. The shoemakers left their mark. As fate would have it, one of Fadda's athletes named Aderbal Baptista actually worked as a shoemaker. From that day on, Aderbal began to use as a benchmark in competitions. In addition to the Fadda Jiu-Jitsu flag, the Shoemakers Association, a union of which Aderbal was a part. This was a way of highlighting her humble origins, but proud of all the content of her differentiated Jiu-Jitsu. After this event, footlock techniques were banned for many years due to historical precedent. They were rejected for a long time in training and academies by teachers and athletes, who attributed to them the adjectives of crude technique and suburbanism. In Faddas and Gracie's challenge, the end result heavily favored recognition for the previously unknown Faddas, although technically the win could go to Gracie. Fadda achieved his intentions to present a different way of practicing Jiu-Jitsu, implementing suburban Jiu-Jitsu, accessible to all. But at the end of it all, mainly showing that Jiu-Jitsu also had other representations, not only and exclusively the Gracie Academy.